Hello, I am a real rabbit, and I watched a movie with my audience slaves. It's this movie. This is the movie I watched. Darklight is a sci-fi horror, and I use that term loosely here, fit for straight-to-DVD distribution, where the budget seems to have been spent entirely on travel expenses to the glorious Republic of Georgia and the knockoff dollar store xenomorph costume. Not to be confused with the Darklight novel regarding vampires that actually sounds worth your time. The movie was described to me as a cross between the Aliens franchise and Signs, but such a comparison is akin to describing the Artemis Fowl movie as the twisted inbred mutant product of Mission Impossible and Lord of the Rings. The movie begins with an establishing shot of a run-down farmhouse and a fog machine in the background, followed by a frantic scene inside where our protagonist and mother, Annie Knox of course, played by Jessica Madsen, sweeps through the interior of the house with a shotgun in hand, seemingly on the hunt for, gasp, her daughter, ? I'm sure this is exactly what it looks like, and we have no reason to question it with no plot points and twists to follow. Anyway, she shoots her husband and we cut away to police cars and lights. She's taken into custody and the interview is used as a framing device to describe the first half of the movie as police attempt to discover what happened to her daughter who, gasp again, is missing. What follows is, it's pretty much Signs. It's basically Signs for the first half of the movie, okay? We follow Annie and Emily, the little girl, as they move back into the mother's old family house. Bad memories abound as the two are escaping from an unpleasant divorce. But the house is no spring chicken either, despite being in fantastic condition, given it had been abandoned for years. Apparently it's the place Annie's mother became schizophrenic before she was taken to a hospital and later committed suicide, creating half the issues between her and Mr. Paul. More on that in a moment. The first few nights in the house are supposed to be a suspenseful buildup of blinking lights and mysteriously opening doors. Though I do give the movie some props for a fair point of foreshadowing, a rare moment of cinematic competence as Annie peeks underneath the door to a lift in the house to see earthen material and mist exuding from beneath, only to witness some kind of spooky, nefarious entity on the other side. Savor this. It really doesn't get much better from here, people. Suddenly, we cut to the police station. This is when we find out the interview device as the sheriff is introduced, the character with arguably the most believable dialogue in the entire film for no other reason than we don't really see her as often as the others. We jump back to the main timeline where the husband, Mr. Knox, pays a visit and reveals the tensions in their former marriage through a moderate amount of exposition where we find out about Annie's mother's mental troubles and death and the stress it placed on the marriage, in addition to, his cheating and infidelity, of course. Next night at home, Annie decides to take her daughter out to have some fun in the cornfield. In the middle of the night. In the dark. In a cornfield. Is this a real thing, though? Where on the planet of Earth does one play flashlight tag in a cornfield at night other than in a horror movie? It's like, hey, I know. Let's all go to the beach and cut ourselves to play blood tag in the water. Because that makes sense. Obviously, this doesn't go particularly well, because literally, how else could it? After a bit of, fun, Emily disappears from the cornfield and Amelia is barraged by a bevy of mildly annoying lights from around the field. She returns to the farmhouse only to see Emily standing on the rooftop in a daze. Now don't question it, just accept it. Ignore that these aliens don't have machines, ships, or magical teleportation thingamajigs. Just absorb it and forget this happens as the movie progresses, because it doesn't really matter. Of course, she calls the police the next morning and we see our favorite sheriff again, who is particularly skeptical and realistically unable to literally do anything at all given nothing has actually happened. The tension, ladies and gentlemen, is palpable. The next 20 minutes is your typical running around the house, chasing shadows in windows, and watching conspiracy theory videos online. The police are called once again after more lights in the fields, and the husband makes another return criticizing Annie for all the crazy and the cops showing up, jumping into a mild panic to further question her parenting skills when Emily enters the room with a bloody nose. Annie sees something that shouldn't be out of the corner of her eyes and gives chase throughout the house, chasing the formless shadow always one step ahead of her. Emily, the young girl, is naturally terrified and attempts to evade whatever is chasing her. Gasp! Annie was chasing the alien this entire time? Not Emily? Who would have ever guessed? She once again calls the police, but once again Annie is an idiot and doesn't understand what perspective means. The very next scene after another flash to the police precinct is when she accidentally shoots her husband, who also happens to be visiting in the middle of the night for some reason, and we're treated to a barrage of different shots of the incident at the beginning of the movie. About 40 minutes in, we finally see the knockoff alien as it drags Emily into the lift. Thankfully, the movie catches itself up and the timelines merge. For some strange reason, the police don't believe her story about accidentally shooting her husband with a shotgun and aliens kidnapping her daughter, and she's hauled off in a prison van. Lucky for her, a conveniently placed cow blocks the road and causes the van to careen into a nearby ravine. And to further cement her status among the old gods, she's the only one out of 5 to live through the horrific crash. Naturally, the police conclude everyone must have died in the vehicle accident that caused virtually no exterior damage despite it being upside down, and presume those they can't find were simply washed away in the river. Where is the first place Annie goes? Why, the farmhouse crime scene, of course, you foolish human. There she takes a delightful bath, changes out of that drab prison orange, and grabs her emergency stash of cash and firearms she just happens to have tucked away under the floorboards for just such an occasion. Would you believe we're barely over the movie's halfway mark? That's because we're about to go on a side quest. Do remember, earlier she saw this one video on this one site about this one conspiracy theorist. Annie decides to find him and ask him for help. And yes, the old gods are again smiling upon her, as this particular individual lives close enough nearby she can simply walk across the field to find him, in spite of his surprise that she was able to do so, despite the fact he advertises himself across the internet. He ends up locking her in a room after having a frank discussion about aliens wanting to eat children, which I find offensive, thank you very much, presumably wanting the fame and glory as the one to film or capture these aliens, traveling to the crime scene farmhouse to do so. We then go on a 10-minute chase scene with this man we barely know as the aliens decide they want him to die until they finally corner him. The scene climaxes with the elderly gentleman sucked off of all his energy and left as a husk of his former self at an abandoned train yard. The police find him that same night and decide to investigate his dwelling, confused as to why he appears so crispy. For some reason, after all this time, Annie has made barely any attempt to escape the room. And yes, the old gods once again smile upon her as police unwittingly unlock her room but miss her while she hides. They realize she had visited some time ago after watching video footage captured by CCTV on the property, but she has already escaped the premises while their backs are turned. Annie returns home with one mission in mind: to confront the Chinese knockoff xenomorphs once and for all, shotgun in hand, again. It's at this time that our classic idiot father walks in without a clue. Again. Don't ask why he's there. Don't ask why he's there in the middle of the night. Don't ask how his shotgun wound to the chest is even doing, given it occurred presumably 48 hours prior. Doesn't matter. He meanders through the house, all while Annie does the same with her weapon drawn, oblivious of one another until Paul discovers the hatch in the lift leading into the alien's secret underground lair. Meanwhile, a running gun battle proceeds throughout the house as Annie takes pot shots at the poor defenseless alien chasing her in an attempt to get her attention. The alien disappears for a brief moment when the sheriff pops into the house, gun drawn towards Annie. Of course, the officer is alone and inside the house at the final act of the movie. Thus, the alien appears behind her and sucks her off of energy as well. Another back and forth between protagonist and antagonist, and Annie finds the entrance to the alien lair. It doesn't take long for her and Paul to find each other, and this time she doesn't blow a hole the size of Texas into his chest. They explore the underground lair looking for their daughter, witnessing the horrors of the aliens, seeing little children bound in pits of green goo. After a short time, they find their daughter on an altar, but a poor, hungry, innocent alien is just around the corner. They pull back and watch the alien feast on their grubby little child while they formulate a plan. Paul decides to pointlessly sacrifice himself, as one does, so Annie and Emily can escape back up into the farmhouse. Adopting the mantra of kill it with fire, Annie begins dousing the farmhouse in presumably flammable liquid. But it can't be that easy, of course. One of our aliens surprises Annie and tries to suck her off too, but she escapes with a well-placed taser to the neck. The farmhouse is set ablaze and we live happily ever after. Nobody will ever question an escaped convict, a charged sheriff, and a crispy husband. And don't forget the burning farmhouse, of course. The first half of the movie was often interrupted by the unnecessary framing devices of the interview. It served absolutely no purpose other than preparing the audience for the eventuality she would be taken into custody. All events occurred in sequential order and thus didn't need to be referenced back and forth between pointless questions the audience already knew or expected the answer to in the next scene. Worse yet, the entire scene with the conspiracy theorists chased by our titular alien baby boys served absolutely no purpose, as his death could have simply been summed up by police arriving on the scene and displaying the charred corpse. This would have perhaps added to the mystery of the light baby's true capabilities. Let's also not forget to offer Miss Annie our Mother of the Year award for her idiotic handling of the entire situation in the first act. Annie, with the social intelligence of an alien from Europa.
Why did you buy 2 shotguns and a .38 last week?
For home protection.
Protection against what?
Is it wrong to own guns?
Was our protagonist who thought it appropriate to play tag in a cornfield at night with her 10-year-old daughter and expected everyone to believe her outlandish claims, despite evidence suggesting the contrary, with no hint of understanding that others may be skeptical and require convincing. Yet, I would be remiss in my duties if I did not mention Mr. Knox, the father deciding to arrive at a private residence in the middle of the night on multiple occasions on a whim. The same gentleman whom received a significant holiday gift in the form of buckshot square to the sternum and was walking about the following day with absolutely no hint of grievous injury. If you were curious as to why our aliens weren't felled by the scattergun after repeated shells, you need look no further, as the weapon was incapable of even slaying Paul Skinny Jeans Knox. Our characters exhibited a maximum range of emotions up to 3, mostly less, with our protagonist shifting from frustration, determination, to a brief 2-minute window of happiness playing cornfield tag. Of course, the most important aspect of any movie is its antagonist, or its monster. Impressive, it was not. The visual design itself very much possessed the genes of the infamous xenomorph from the Aliens franchises. It was more the bastard child none of the parents on the block want to talk about than the legitimate heir. The singular glowing eye in the center of the forehead was a unique piece that most definitely could have led to the design philosophy, but was likely forgotten in favor of the more familiar alien biomechanical spiel. Then again, this was likely a $10 costume from the half-off store, so, All in all, this movie was just terrible. I warned you. I have lost multiple brain cells watching this movie. Twice, in fact. For a movie night, I definitely would not recommend it. For killing time and to force knowledge from the brain, I would conclude it is an acceptable tool.